I found out why my grandpa keeps drapes over his mirrors. Growing up, my grandpa always kept drapes over the mirrors in his house. I was a kid and he had a big house. I just assumed it was a fancy decoration. We moved before I was too old and I kind of forgot about it. Once when I was 15, he came to visit our house, and my mom had me help cover all the mirrors in our house. Your grandfather has a phobia of mirrors, was all she said on the topic. I knew this was out of the ordinary now, and one night while we were sitting in the living room together, I just blurted it out. Why are you afraid of mirrors? Oh, your mother probably wouldn't want me to tell you. It's not a nice story. Let's just say they remind me of your grandmother and leave it at that. Come on, I'm practically an adult. I can handle it. Well, okay, maybe. When your mom was just a kid, we found this mirror. My mom walked into the room and glared at him. I brought the two of you some dessert. You're not telling her that story, are you? She's too young to hear all of that. She handed us some ice cream and my grandfather didn't budge again. I tried to get him or my mom to tell me for the following year or two. Every rejection added more intrigue to the story. The story is about your grandmother leaving us. It's painful for us to talk about, my mom offered once after I had pestered her about it. I understood then why nobody wanted to talk about it, and over time, I lost the desire to hear it. I almost forgot about it until this morning. My grandpa called me last week to tell me that he had a heart attack. He was okay and being discharged. I asked him if I could visit. This morning, I arrived to his house from the airport to find the familiar drapes drawn over the mirrors. My curiosity came back, but I couldn't ask an old man that had just had a heart attack to reminisce about the love of his life leaving him. I didn't have to ask. I never told you the story about the mirror, he said, after we had finished catching up with each other and sitting in an awkward silence. I think now's as good as a time as any. I might not have long left. They gave you a pacemaker, Grandpa. You'll be fine. I'm still 89 years old. I didn't have a reassuring response for that, so I just nodded. He started the story. We had just moved into our first real house, after living in the basement apartment of my parents' house. Your mother was about 6 and really needed her own room. We bought an old house, too remote to be called the suburbs, but I didn't mind the extra commute to give the family some breathing room. We were still considering having more children, and with our own house, it seemed possible. The place was a fixer-upper, but your grandmother had a knack for it. She repainted inside and out, fixed lights, decorated, furnished the place beautifully, and even managed to fix the plumbing in one of the bathrooms on her own. There was an unfinished basement, and we got the idea in our heads to fix it up and turn it into an entertaining space. While we were preparing the space to start work and getting it inspected for asbestos, we found that one of the walls was built inside the foundation. It wasn't like a false wall, it was real, but it wasn't part of the original foundation, so we tore it down for the extra 10 foot or so of floor space. There was an antique mirror back there, one of those self-standing mirrors with a swivel covering with a sheet. Thing must have been as old as the house, maybe older. We talked about having it appraised to see if it was worth anything, but decided to keep it as a talking piece. We finished the basement and set the mirror up as decoration at our celebration get-together. We realized there's something strange about the mirror. The reflections were off. Like a funhouse mirror. One guy would be stretched too tall, another too short, and one of your grandmother's girlfriends had no face. It's kind of creepy, but kind of funny. A defective mirror. We kept using that space for weekend gatherings. Grandmother would cook some hors d'oeuvres, and we'd have some drinks. The mirror was always a fun little attraction. This is where it gets strange. I guess the mirror was contagious or something, because the other mirrors in the house started to play with the reflections. Sometimes my hair would look fine, but when I started driving to work, I would notice I was a mess. One time I saw two of me standing there. I got out of the house to go to work, at least. Grandmother was constantly assaulted by the mirror. She would tell me she was obese or that her hair was falling out, and she looked the same she always had. I tried telling her she's just as beautiful as I had ever seen her, but when your own reflection is playing tricks on you, how can you believe that? She even told me one time that the mirror had tried to grab her and pull her in. I wrote it off as crazy. Our anniversary is coming up, so I came up with a plan to help bring the magic back. I got one of the neighbor girls to watch your mother and took your grandmother out to dinner and dancing at a new restaurant. They had floor-to-ceiling mirrors throughout the place. When your grandmother saw her reflection in those mirrors, she sobbed. I thought I had messed up, but then she kissed me. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you, I haven't seen me in so long." "This is how I always see you, baby," I said back. Sorry about the romantic stuff, but that night, that was the last time we were happy. It was amazing, like when we had first met. My grandpa was crying now. I may have been too. "Are you sure you want to keep going, Grandpa?" "You need to know," he said. He wiped his eyes and began again. "When we got home, the sitter was a wreck. She was screaming about how she and your mother was playing hide and seek, but your mother had been hiding without being found for 3 hours. You hear these horror stories of kids locking themselves in dryers and things. We panicked and split up to search the house, calling her name. Your grandmother went to search the basement, and after I had looked through your mother's room, I went back to check on her. She was sitting in front of the antique mirror, sobbing and screaming at it. 'Give me back my daughter, please. Take me instead.' I was walking up to her and said, 'Baby, what's going on?' And she said, 'She's in there. I see her. It took her. Give me back my daughter.' I was almost to the point I could see the reflection when the sitter yelled down the stairs that she had found your mother in her room, hiding under the bed. I checked under the bed, so that meant your mother had been running around actively avoiding us. I was pissed, especially seeing the state of your grandmother was in over it. She's probably 10 by then. She should have known better. We both ran upstairs and gave her a hug, but I told her she was grounded for a month and should know better not to make us worry like that. She just looked at her feet and apologized. After that, your grandmother became convinced that your mother had been replaced that night. She told me that your mother had started writing with her left hand instead of her right. There's a scar on her left ankle that had switched sides too. Finally, she told me she kept seeing our real daughter in the mirror in the basement, so she must have been replaced by something else. I talked to her about getting therapy, and she stopped talking to me about it. I thought maybe it had resolved on its own. I came home one day to your mother locked in her room while your grandmother pounded on the door with a kitchen knife in her hand. She was saying, "Give me back my daughter, you bitch." I tried to talk to her, but she lunged at me with the knife and accused me of being replaced too. I didn't know what to do, so I called 911. They killed me to do it. Your grandmother looked me with this hurt expression one I'll never forget as I hung up the phone. She ran into the basement. I stood by the door to the basement until the cops showed up, but when we went downstairs, she was gone, just vanished. There was no other way out of the basement. The cops took my statement and eventually was settled on the idea that she hadn't run into the basement and had mistaken which door she used in the heat of the moment. They never found her, but I started seeing her in the mirrors. First just the one in the basement, then all throughout the house. We moved to another house and it stopped for a bit, then got worse. Even in the mirrors at work, I saw her. I put these drapes up at home to get some peace. I've been doing it ever since. He stopped. My head was still catching up. Can anyone else see her? He laughed, stood up, and walked over to a curtain on the wall. You want to know if I'm just going mad? Let's see. He pulled the curtains and smiled sadly at the mirror. I couldn't see anything while seated, but I stood and froze. An elderly woman stood on the other side of the mirror, behind my grandfather's reflection. I had assumed he had PTSD or something. My mind was breaking. He pulled the curtain shut. You saw her. Not everyone can, he said. Am I going crazy? I asked. I've been asking myself that for years, sweetheart. Sometimes I think your grandmother may have been the sane one. I finished my visit with him, somewhat stunned, and went to check into my hotel. I'm staying a few more days. Just before writing this post, my mom called me to see how my visit with my grandpa went. Talk about anything interesting? She asked. I couldn't answer. I had glanced at the mirror instinctively when she asked and saw my mother's reflection looking back at me. Hello? Did I lose you? She said. Not really, just hospital stuff. Sorry, I got a text, I said, forcing myself back. After I got off the phone, I put a sheet over the mirror. I found a tape recorder in the woods. What happened afterwards will haunt me forever. Just to give some information, I was part of a search team. I'm not a part of it anymore, after what happened. Some time ago, we were alerted of a hiker that went missing in the woods, so a search party of about 40 to 50 people was arranged. The woods are fairly big, so having that many people helps to scour the area. About 5 people were put to a singular group. The area of the woods mine and another group was sent to search was an area of trees that stayed dead. The forest is just completely dead in that area, no animals and no plant life. I never liked this part of the woods. Ever since I was a child, I felt like I was being watched in that part. I, along with the others, started the search. My group went in one direction and the other in the opposite direction. Throughout the whole time there, I felt chills down my spine, as if something was watching me. I tried to dismiss the whole thing and focus on searching for the missing hike. The farther we went in, the more I felt my stomach sink lower and lower as my heart rate sped up. By the time it was nearly dusk, I had nearly worked myself into a panic attack, but I tried to stay calm. It was getting dark now, so our group leader led us back to our meetup spot where the other group was already at. Both leaders decided to call it a day and continue searching tomorrow. Everyone agreed, looking very much worried. Perhaps they had felt what I felt. After about 45 minutes, we all felt despair. We spent 45 minutes trying to get out when it took a shorter time to get back to the tree edge. It wasn't like we didn't mark the trees. We marked the trees we passed, but now we can't find the marked trees. It was like the trees were moving and distorted our sense of direction. We had tried using our phones to call for help, but there was no signal, so we continued on walking. I tripped on a tree root and shouldn't have been there. I fell over, and when I went to get up, I noticed a voice recording cassette tape. I picked it up and alerted the people in my party. We decided to listen to it, since we saw nothing else to do. We had succumbed to the fact that we were trapped in the forest. We decided to listen to it. Listen, I don't have much time left before I'm fully consumed, but to whoever finds this, get the hell out of the woods as fast as you can. I had only come here to hike, but things went downhill fast. After about 2 hours into my hike, I noticed something off. The scenery had changed from the green, lustrous forest I had entered to the dark, dead forest I had found myself in. I tried finding my way back, but no matter what I tried, I couldn't. I had fallen, and I was for sure stuck. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't, and then it attacked. Vines had stabbed into most of my body and was wrapping around me. The pain was unbearable as I felt my arms and legs break. It's the trees are alive. I'm now being absorbed by the tree roots. One last thing to whoever found this. If you make it out of here, can you tell my family I love them? That was the end of the recording. We looked around at each other and to the trees that surrounded us. One of the people spoke up. Surely that wasn't real, right? Why else would someone record that? The shits and giggles of it? Another person retorted. Hey, don't try to start anything. We all need to find a way out of here, regardless of if it's real or not, I stated. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement. But how are we going to get out if the trees can move? Another person asked. Everyone just looked at the ground and stayed silent. We didn't know we could get out. Guys, I feel something on my leg, someone said right as they were dragged away. We heard their screams as the sounds of bone crushing followed. Their screams stopped abruptly as we were all shaken to our core. We were too shocked to even scream. We just stood there, staring in the direction of which our teammate was dragged off to. It wasn't long before another person was dragged away, with their screams being cut off abruptly. This knocked us out of our shock and just started running. As I ran, I hear the sounds of others screaming, knowing that they were taken. I just ran as fast as I could. There are now about 4 of us left, just running. The person off to my right screamed. I looked up just in time to see them get impaled by a tree branch. Their blood fell on me, covering me completely. The other 2 grabbed me by the arms and dragged me along as they ran. I ran with them, but I was still shocked. My body moved on. It says my head went blank. The sun just peeked up above the trees as we saw the wood's edge. I heard one of them say something as our running sped up. I guess the thought of surviving snapped me out of the shock enough to notice all the police cars and the 2 helicopters that flew above us. Many things happened after that are just a blur to my memory. It's been almost 2 years since that incident, and I finally felt confident sharing my story. I go see a therapist for the lasting damage the incident left on my mental state. But I'm doing well. The other 2 people that survived are doing well also. Strangely enough, the incident pulled us together and we are now close friends. I guess we felt that we could only ever truly understand each other after sharing something as traumatic as that. I don't know if I'll ever truly move on from this, but knowing I have 2 other people who feel the same way makes dealing with this a lot easier. And to everyone that reads this, please stay safe, no matter what it is that you are doing. I'm still confused about what happened at my school right before summer break began. It was the middle of June. The school year was in process of ending. I studied for finals an hour every other day at best. Despite the stress of it, I was excited about summer break. I was expecting to go on a couple of trips, see some cool things. I was excited, but after what happened, I'm afraid a little bit of anxiety will be lingering in the back of my head for the course of the summer. Probably for the next year. I was sitting in my period 3 class when it began. Hello, this is your principal, Mr. Sanderson, an intruder who has entered the school. Teachers, make sure your doors are locked. Students, hide out of view of every window. This is not a drill. A scream filled the air, cut off by the announcement ending. My stomach sank a bit. Hopefully this wouldn't last long and nobody would be hurt, I thought to myself. I got out of my seat and clambered with the others to the spot farthest away from the windows, a spot near a row of desks at the far end of the classroom. The teacher locked the door, switched the lights off, then she sat down with us. As we remained silent, 4 screams echoed from down the hallway. Each of them were followed by a loud thud. My heart began to speed up. That stuff didn't sound too good. Soon there was a 5th scream. one that sounded a lot closer. It was caught off by a louder thud. My nerves began to choke me. I hadn't experienced a school lockdown like this before. One weird thing was that I hadn't heard a single noise other than the echoing screams. But that was when I heard low-sounding thumps coming from out in the hallway. They got louder, closer. They were chilling, in fact. I couldn't tell what could have made that noise. I had never heard such sounds before. They were uncanny, chilling. They sounded familiar, but at the same time, I'd never heard a sound like that. I can't describe it in a good enough detail. I only ever felt chills that deep when watching a scary movie. While my unease got worse, the ceiling began to vibrate. A machine-like howl echoed from the mini presentation room next door. What followed was a loud crash. I couldn't tell what was going on in there, but I could speculate. Thinking about it, trying to understand it based on nothing concrete, only made my nerves worse. The low thumping continued. I glanced towards my classmates. Their looks of confusion, looks of terror, one making a blank facial expression, and some heads buried behind legs. I could guess I had a terrified expression myself. Somewhere things were happening, and it sounded like something was destroyed next door. I didn't want to know what was about to happen next. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the teacher take out her phone. I looked away, but I overheard her talk to herself. "No service?" she asked. I found it weird that her cell service signal would cut off like that, assuming she didn't think it would cut off randomly based on her vocal expression. It didn't make any sense the more I thought about it. As I thought to myself, I noticed the outline of the trees outside was a bit off. I hesitated to get a better look, though, as I didn't want the intruder to see me. Things were silent again for some time. At one point, I noticed the air smelled cleaner than usual. My focus on the air was broken by the sound of a pair of boots speeding past the classroom. "Don't focus on it. We know what's there. If you look at it, it will torture you," a female voice said. "What is it ticking for?" another female voice asked. "Keep quiet. People can hear," the first one responded. "Ticking. It." I wanted to know what was going on. Why were we being intruded on by it? What was it? Well, I was curious. I was too afraid to find out. It sounded weird and destructive enough. It was dangerous. That's all I needed to know. "Get back!" I heard the voices say as they echoed from down the hallway. An eerie roar filled the air. Everything in the room began to shake. Once the roar stopped, the sounds of claws clattering around began to come from next door. Awkward-sounding growls that also sounded like a roar of machines followed. It sounded like a bunch of dogs had infested the room next door, but these dogs sounded off. After a couple more seconds, I heard 3 loud bangs. It sounded like someone was trying to break the door down next door. The sound of wood hitting the ground surprised me. The door was taken down in seconds. Whatever those animalistic-sounding things were, it sounded like they got their exit. The sound of claws and growls sped by our classroom. They didn't sound natural or normal at all. They alone sent chills down my spine. Only seconds later, there was a banging on our classroom door. It was followed by intense scratching noises. I looked over at the door. I hoped whatever those things were would be stopped by somebody. The scratching continued. At one point, a claw pierced through the door, sending pieces of wood flying across the room. I held myself still. I had no idea what to do in the case of an attack like this, other than hiding. There was nowhere to run to at all. An intruder could break down the door at any moment. My heart was pounding. I was hoping my friends were okay. The intense scratching on the door continued for some time until whatever was making it let out an erratic growl. The chilling growl went on for a few seconds, then it, along with all other growls and scratching sounds, just stopped. Everything was silent again. I looked back over at the door. A purple smoke-like substance was beginning to leak through the hole in the door. What's happening out there? The teacher asked herself. I don't remember what happened right after that. All I know is that I was lying down in the hallway right outside the classroom. I felt cold, sweaty, and my mind was racing with blank thoughts. I couldn't recall what had happened right after the teacher asked herself what was going on, although I could recall some of what I felt. It was chaotic, chilling, and dreadful. Trying to recall it felt as if I was trying to recall a fading dream. I picked myself up. There was a tingling on both of my arms. I looked at them to see if there was anything on them. Lights were off, however, so I couldn't see them. I stepped back into the classroom, where there was a sunlight shining in through the windows. The first thing I noticed was the classroom was empty. No tables, no chairs, no people. Just empty space. I looked at the windows. The view outside was very different from what I was used to. It was just grass with a few trees scattered about. The concrete fences nearby, buildings, and parked cars were gone. A dirt road was in the place of the paved road I was familiar with. I glanced at my arms. They were clean, aside from there being a mark on my lower right arm, a circle with a downward pointing arrow going through it. Out of habit, I flipped the light switch. The lights didn't come on. I looked out into the hallway, noticing the door to the classroom across the hall was open. Usually a teacher's desk sat in the corner of that room, within the view from the doorway. But it wasn't there. I walked over into the room to find the room was empty as well. What happened? I wondered. Where did everybody and everything go? If everything was moved and nobody was around, that had to mean the situation was over, right? I hoped. I was still anxious, though. I peeked back out into the hall, but I looked down the hallway in each direction. There was nothing down either end of the hallway. Of course, it was dark in most of the hallway, but every classroom door was open, letting some sunlight shine into the hallway. I looked back out into the hallway. I saw nothing to my left. It was perfectly empty. I then looked to my right. For a second, I thought there was nothing in that direction. Then I noticed something was moving towards me at a slow pace. It took me an entire hallway from floor to ceiling, wall to wall, yet it was able to move forward. I couldn't make out what it was. It was a pitch black, darker than dark corners of the hallway. It made a light sweeping sound as it moved. It covered each doorway as it moved by, blocking the daylight shining into the hallway. It looked alive, but I didn't understand how it could be a living thing. It was uncanny. A pit formed in my stomach from just not being able to understand it. As simple as it was so uncanny. I stepped back into the classroom and shut the door. I took a couple steps back too. Although I didn't know what the mass was, I assumed it was part of the attack. I didn't know what it wanted, but I wasn't going to risk getting too close to it. I stared out of the small window of the classroom door for what felt like a few minutes. The dark mass wasn't covering the window or moving by at all. I couldn't see the interior of the classroom across the hallway. I was confused. I wasn't going to go back out there until it passed by, but what was it doing? I asked myself. I'm not sure how long I waited. The clock above the door was stuck at 1:51 p.m., so there's no way to be sure. I can only guess that it was a few minutes. Thinking the dark mass wasn't going to move, I walked up to the door. I opened it up. When I looked to my right, there it was. The dark mass. It was still there, sitting still, maybe 2 feet away from me. I stared at it in confusion. Chills ran down my spine as I took in its black, dark, uncanny appearance. I ducked out of the room. I hesitated to look behind me. I sped walk down the hallway. As I ran, I noticed there weren't any objects in other classrooms either. When I saw the exit doors, I lunged towards them. Once I reached them, I pushed up against them as they opened. And when you push them, however, instead of bursting out of them, I slammed into them. They didn't open. I pushed them again, but they didn't budge. I turned my head back. Dark mass was about 10 rooms down, climbing towards me at a moderate pace. I ducked into the nearest room to my left, which happened to be the front office. I slammed the door shut. I look around the room. The front desk was still there, but the rest of the room was empty. That was aside from dozens of papers that were strewn all over the room. Ironically, there was only one piece of paper on the front desk. It was a sticky note with something written on it. Don't go into room 127. Room 127 was the classroom next to my period 3 classroom. The classroom those crashing noises came from earlier on. Of course, I was going to follow what the note read. I still didn't want to know what was going on in there. I did recall seeing the door to that classroom being the most wide open as I was running from the dark mass. I didn't take a good look into the room, however. I looked out the window. The black mass covered it. There was definitely no way I was leaving the room unless I broke a window. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything I could use to break any windows. The pit of my stomach grew deeper. There was no way out until the mass went away. I stepped up to the small window on the door to get a close look at the black mass. As uncanny and chilling as it was, my curiosity was off the charts. I peered out the window. All I could see was a throbbing blackness. It looked blurry, but solid at the same time. A pit formed in my stomach again. After what felt like an hour, I looked out the window again. The blackness was still there, throbbing. I walked up to the window on the far end of the room, hoping somebody was there. As I looked outside, I couldn't see anybody. No one was out there. It was just a sunny field, which I found to be kind of ironic. The dread within me got a tiny bit deeper. The thumps returned, but they were coming from the floor above. Great, I thought. The ceiling began to shake and crack. At least that's the best I can describe it. I jolted into the counseling office. Once there, I watched as the ceiling in the main room fell to the ground. Something came down with it. It took me a couple of seconds to piece together what I was looking at. When I began to comprehend it, a wave of dread washed over me. All I knew was that I was looking at a blurry figure, one that felt like 100 malicious souls that were giving me death stares. As I comprehended a bit more, it became clear to me that I was wearing some sort of cloak or armor, some combination of the two. My head began to ache as I tried to make out his getup, so I looked away. At least it only took me a second to come up with a theory for why it crashed the ceiling to the ground as an entrance. He must have wanted to let his creatures get to the upper floor quicker. The sound of heavy digging filled the room. I glanced sideways at whatever was going on. The thing was seamlessly digging into the ground. Last time a thing dug through the ground, a dozen growling things crawled out, as far as I heard. By association, dread washed over me. I shut the door. As I prepared for the worst, multiple bangs shook the door. With each bang, the door cracked a little. After 3, the door flew off its hinges. The thing with the cloak armor stepped in. It picked me up by my shoulders, squeezing my torso to the point where I could barely breathe. It brought me over to the hole it dug in the middle of the office. Dirt and debris were scattered everywhere. I looked down into the hole. It was pitch darkness, but I could hear the sounds of animalistic screeching. A lot of them echoed. My heart was pounding against my chest as I anticipated the worst. The sound of combustion came from the right side of the door. It was followed by a loud screech that sounded like a human scream. I looked at the small door window. The black mass fell. Thick, dark gray smoke obscured the view from the window. The way the cloak armor guy was gripping me made me unable to take deep breaths. I began to feel lightheaded. The door creaked open. A silver bar flew into the room, bouncing of the desk. At this point, my vision was slipping away. A white flash filled the room. I saw a second of it before passing out. I awoke some time later. I was sitting in the school auditorium. The lights were back on. An up-tempo pop song was playing from the loudspeakers. It was being played quite loudly, like it was supposed to wake us up. Luckily, it was just falsetto singing over mostly just a fast drum beat, so it wasn't too hard on my ears. Dozens of other students were in the room as well. It clicked into my head that an average assembly was happening, but I didn't remember one being scheduled for that day. I looked over to my right. The kid sitting beside me was sleeping. I looked over to my left. The kid sitting on my left was lifting his head up. I took a look around. A bunch of other kids were lifting their heads. Some of the others looked fast asleep. Where were these people? I wondered. 2 people in suits were standing on the stage with the secretary, who was adjusting his shirt while standing still. After the song ended, he walked up to the microphone. Attention, students. Now that you're all awake or waking, I would like to address the mishap we had today. Luckily, none of you sustained any more than some bruises. As for Principal Sanderson and the school officers, they all had to be taken to the hospital. As for all of you, no one will believe that our school was taken over by the things we saw. We don't have any footage of the ordeal that we can show anybody. So it's best to look sane and call it a wild animal attack, rather than have a psych look after us because someone thought we were crazy. And it is possible that it was just a gas leak, but we haven't gotten confirmation yet, he said. Whatever happened felt like a dream at that point. I wanted to believe it was a dream or a gas leak-induced hallucination, but the principal was taken to the hospital. I mean, a wild animal attack sounds about right, but it was more than that. No matter what it was, though, I just wanted to get back home. After it ended, we all exited the schools. I looked around to get a look at the field, but it was gone. The pavement, parked cars, and buildings were back. I was downright confused. When I got back home, my parents were standing outside. They hugged me, then asked me what happened. Some wild animals somehow got in. Only the principal and the school officers were hurt, I said. They told me they were glad I was okay. Then we stepped inside. That evening, I checked the local news. There was a report about the school having gone into a lockdown due to a wild animal. I mentioned the thing about the Principal Sanderson and the school officers being put in the hospital. There was no mention of the armor guy or the dark mass or any of the destruction. The only pictures in the article were the principal and the school officers. None of the creatures or the destruction. There's nothing about a mystery field or a sudden dirt road either. According to the article, the police showed up in minutes, went in, then they came out 2 hours later. What was up with the field then? I asked myself. There were no witness reports either. There weren't any video news reports on YouTube or any tweets about the ordeal whatsoever. I chalked most of the social media silence up to the fact that the school was in a small town 100 miles away from any city, the nearest city only being Eugene. As I sat confused, I remembered the mark I saw on my arm. I turned my wrist towards my face. The mark was still there. I googled the markings to see if anybody would come up, but nothing like it came up. I asked my friend if they remembered any of what happened. They told me they didn't want to talk about it. The next I attended school, I walked by the main office room. There was a chalkboard taped up over the windows. Everything else was normal. The desks were back, the chairs were back, and the lights were working again. I still don't understand what happened that day. I don't even know why everyone disappeared, yet we all experienced it. One friend of mine told me he was being chased by a dark mass all alone, in the same room I was in, yet I didn't see or hear him. Every time I think about dark spaces, a light sense of dread washes over me. I hope somebody gets to the bottom of what happened, sooner or later. I'm happy to get this out. I hope I'll be able to enjoy the rest of this summer as much as I can without my nerves getting too bad. I don't know why it happened. I don't know whether or not it'll happen again.